heavens and new earth. The new heavens and new earth. It's not the greatest, is it? That's why I don't judge you very hard in your artistic ability. Because I have none. Anyway, so there's our city, something like that. However big it is. You got your... Again, we've got to get out of the idea that this is all make-believe. It's not make-believe. It's not fuzzy kind of stuff. It's not spiritual, allegorical kind of talk. It's real, it's literal, it's tangible. But when the Lord comes back, remember in 2 Peter 3:10, behold, the day of the Lord comes as a thief in the night, in which the heavens will pass away with a great noise, and the elements will melt with fervent heat. Both the earth and the works that are in it will be burned up. So that's the context. The Lord comes back. He's coming back here in the clouds. He's on his horse. He's got flames of fire coming out of him. The earth, which right now is corrupted in the very rocks that we saw in that video, Dr. Robert Genry, there's degeneration in the very rocks themselves. When he comes back, this earth is going to be purified, just like taking gold that has impurities in it, putting it in the fire, it's burned away. What are we left with? We're left with a kainos uranos, and a kainos kaine. So a new earth, new heavens, and a new earth. This word kainos, I think we've talked about this. Two words for new. Kainos essentially means fresh, whereas neos means like young, like a newborn baby, a neonatal, a newborn baby. So what seems to be the case is, in the age to come, this is still going to be the same ball of dirt that we're on today, as far as I can tell. But the difference is that it's made completely new, because the impurities, the corruption, the decay, the degeneration, the second law of thermodynamics is all taken out. And that process of getting that out is a very fiery transition. So when the Lord comes back, and now the earth can be released, can be liberated from the corruption of bondage, or the bondage of corruption. It's liberated from that bondage of corruption. The release is a very fiery and explosive process. But the earth doesn't blow up like the Death Star in Star Wars. It doesn't blow into a billion bits, but it remains the earth that we know. And so there still will be features of the earth that we understand today. The earth, or the sea, is going to be no more, it says. And by sea, what I'm understanding, to the best of my ability, is that today the earth is marked by having really one large body of water. We call it, 4 oceans, basically, right? You've got the Pacific, Atlantic, Indian, and the Arctic Ocean. Those are your oceans. But they're all one body of water, aren't they? They're all connected. I don't see any lines between them, or gates as you go through. It's just one big body of water. And where did all that water come from? From the flood, right? It came from the flood. The water was underneath the earth before, and it says the fountains of the deep broke open, the water came out, and where did it all go? Well, the mountains rose up, the valleys sank down, and so now that water that God used to judge the world is there in our oceans, or the ocean, the sea, if you will. So before the flood, you had a number of localized bodies of water, it's thought, because God talks about the seas. In Genesis, he talks about the seas. Let the seas bring forth the fish and such. So that appears to be what we're going to go back to. We're going to have probably a number of big lakes, let's call them. and they'll be fresh. It won't be salt, but they'll be fresh. And so we'll have that. We'll still have some of the similar geographic features and places that we have today will be there, but things will also be quite different. So it's going to be, leave it to God to make it completely new, and yet the same. Just like, and the analogy to that is that we also are going to be completely new, and yet the same, right? Because the word that Jesus uses, he talks about the regeneration, Matthew 19:28. Assuredly I say to you that in the regeneration, when the Son of Man sits on the throne of his glory, there's that throne again. Where's the throne? The throne is in Jerusalem. Where's Jerusalem? What is Jerusalem? It's the new city. It's the new Jerusalem, the heavenly Jerusalem that comes down. So when the Son of Man sits on the throne of his glory, you who have followed me will also sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. Where do we see this, guys? And I'll come back to this in a second. Revelation 20, verse 4. So here's the dragon. He's taken. He's thrown into the pit. Then I saw thrones, and they sat on them, and judgment was committed to them. Whoa. Isn't that cool? There are the thrones. Where do we find this in the Old Testament? Daniel 7, verse 9. I watched till thrones were put in place, and the Ancient of Days was seated. And guess what's coming out of his throne? This fiery flame. Isn't this cool? So we go back to Matthew there. The regeneration, that's the word palingenesia. And the palingenesia, is in Titus 3:5. Not by works of righteousness which we have done, but according to his mercy he saved us, through the washing of regeneration and renewing of the Holy Spirit. You see, it's not that it's not like it's not you, it's still you. I mean, that's important, right? If it's not me, then who is it? My clone that I have no idea what he's thinking, what he's doing. I'm not experiencing what he's experiencing. Some other person altogether. Well, that's not me. That has no bearing on me in that case. So it has to be me, but I don't want to be the old me. I want to be a new me. And so that's what God has promised. So in the same way that it's going to be a new me, it's going to be a new you, it's still going to be the same you. So here we're going to have, and this is what it talks about, a new creation. When it says that all things have passed away, all things are a new creation, we're a new creation in Christ, that's the word kainos. That's the kind of creation that we are. So looking at the same word here for the heavens and earth, it's a new heavens, new earth, but it's still the same one. It's amazing. All right, let's take a break. All right, I want to step back for a second and read Revelation 21. Actually, you know what? Let's start in chapter 20. Because we've been looking at all these different passages, and I think now if we go back and we consolidate these and read these together, then we will see kind of what's going on. So, any volunteer to read? All right, Scott, please.
And you want to start with verse 1?
Chapter 20, verse 1, yeah.
Then I saw an angel coming down to reign with him 1,000 years.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that. So this whole thing about this whole thing here, in fact, if you go on in verses 7 and 8, is then when Satan gets out, it's all about how Satan is being bound. Right? Now there's a little 2-verse interlude there. Well, I guess a 3-verse interlude about those that, the thrones that are put in place, those that lost their head, they're going to reign and live with Christ. These will be priests of God and of Christ, will reign with him 1,000 years. And then we pick up the action again there in verse 7. Now when the 1,000 years have expired, Satan will be released from his prison, will go out to deceive the nations which are in the 4 corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, whose number is like the sand of the sea. They went up on the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints in the beloved city, and fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. So if we're looking at Daniel chapter 7, he's got this vision going on. Then in verse 9, I watched till thrones were put in place, and the Ancient Days was seated. His garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, its wheels a burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. 1,000 thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. I watched then because of the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking. I watched till the beast was slain, and its body destroyed and given to the burning flame. Where do we see that? That's in Revelation 19, verse 20. Then the beast was captured, and with him the false prophet who worked signs in his presence, by which he deceived those who received the mark of the beast and those who worshipped his image. These two were cast alive into the lake of fire burning with brimstone. And this burning flame is coming from where? It's coming from God himself. That's what we see. There's a fiery stream issued from before him. Wow. As for the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. And of course we read about that in Isaiah chapter 24, where it says that the kings who are on high are going to be gathered together as prisoners are gathered into the pit, and after many days they will be judged. So we have the season, they're prolonged for a season and a time. The season we get from Revelation chapter 20 is how long? How long is the Satan bound?
1,000.
For 1,000 years. And what is a time? Well, a time times and half a time, right? So if a time times and half a time is 3.5 years, 42 months, 1,260 days, then a time must be 1 year, right? So the duration, it says in Revelation 20 there, it says that, but after these things he must be released for a little while. Well, a little while is a year, turns out. A little while is a year. So after the 1,000 years have expired, he's released from his prison. He goes out, he deceives the nations. So he's got a year. He's going to be working like you wouldn't believe. This is his last opportunity to take on the beloved city. Okay? So he gets all these people together, and all the hordes of hell, they're all released, presumably. They went up on the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints. Now the camp of the saints, I believe, is being referred to in Ezekiel 40 through 48. Well, maybe 47, I suppose. 46, I guess. Where it talks about the temple, talks about the land that is allotted to the Levites, and the holy district will be in the general vicinity known as Israel that we know today. So that's going to be the camp of the saints. And what's in the midst of it? The beloved city, right? So here we've got this. Here's the beloved city. Here is the camp of the saints, something like that, where many of the Jews are living. They're living here, and they got these swaths of land. So they're living here. So all this horde comes up, surrounds the city, and then what happens? What does it say? Fire comes down. Where's that fire coming down from? From God. Out of heaven, right? It says that, yes? And fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. Well, here's God, because he's on top of the city, right? His throne is in Jerusalem or on Jerusalem. Right? God's up here. What does God look like again?
Fire.
Fire and electricity. And we are actually being protected from that power right now by there's a veil that's covering us. It's separating us from him. Which we read in Isaiah 25:7. On this mountain. Great verse, by the way. In case you don't believe me. I know you guys are skeptical. That's good. He will destroy on this mountain the surface of the covering cast over all people and the veil that is spread over all nations. He will swallow up death forever. There's a veil between us. Do we get to peek between it now and then? Sure. Ezekiel says, I saw the heavens opened. Right? Stephen, when he's being stoned, I saw heaven open. Right? Who else saw the heavens opened? Well, John did, right? And I saw heaven opened. So a number of prophets, Elisha and his servant, Lord, open his eyes that he might see, and he saw the horses and chariots of fire. So from time to time, the prophets and others have had the opportunity to look through there. Isaiah says, oh, that you'd rend the heavens and come down. So that veil, the heavens are going to be rolled up like a scroll. That veil that's between us is taken away. In the day of the Lord, the heavens are going to pass away. Right? Jesus says, heaven and earth will pass away, but my words shall not. So the veil between us goes away. God's fire then is now exposed to the world. But there's still mortals on the earth, right? So the mortals are on the earth. So over here is the temple to the east of it. There's this temple. You've got blood sacrifices going on. It's typically taught that the blood sacrifices are a memorial to what the Lord Jesus did. But I would suggest differently. I would suggest that they're not a memorial, but they're a very much a real, important part of that time, and their purpose is a provisional covering. Because what is a sacrifice anyway? The word there, the Day of Atonement in Hebrew is Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur means, yes, atonement, but it really just means the basic meaning is to cover. That's what Noah did. He took the tar and he covered, he covered the ark. So that blood is a covering. When the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies, he had to abstain from sex for a couple of days. He had to be pure. He had, morally, he had to put on a special linen garment. And then he had to take a bowl, sacrifice it, and put the blood on his forehead, on his thumb, and on his toe. And this covered him. This was his hazardous material suit, guys. And then he puts on his force field. Okay? Turns on the force field. But it's a limited life force field. He gets to go into the Holy of Holies. God's glory is there, right? Just blasting away. And he puts the blood, he now goes in to as a intermediary for the people. He's interceding. He's the guy going in. He's the guy going into Fukushima with the fancy suit on, trying to put this thing out for the rest of everybody else. But the high priest goes in there because God wants to be with his people, but there's a small complication. It's called, God's fire and electricity sort of does you in if you get too close. So the high priest goes in there. He puts the blood on the Holy of Holies, on the mercy seat. And this allows God now to dwell with his people so they don't get zapped. Because their unrighteousness, their corruption, and all that stuff just doesn't really jive too well with a perfect, holy, incorruptible. I think that's just a great word. And we're not simply talking that we have bad deeds, but we're talking about things that are just fundamentally wrong. Things that they're broken. And that cannot exist in God's unbroken, perfect presence. So anyway, you've got these people on the earth now, the mortals. the sons of mortals, they are right here in God. They're in God's proximity. How do you account for that? Well, it's the blood sacrifices that now make it possible for them to have a covering for the 1,000 years. But guess what? Once the 1,000 years are expired, people are either in or out. You've made your choice. See, there's a 1,000-year warranty, right? You get 1,000 years, presumably, and after that, it's it. So once this is done, these end, and now when they come up against the beloved city, the fire comes down, because the fire that's just who God is. The fire comes down, and they now have no covering. There's nothing to protect them. They don't have the blood covering. They don't have the garment of salvation covering. They're just toast. That's it. They're just plain toast. And they are done away with. So that brings it together there. And then if we go on and read and go on here, Revelation 20. So fire comes down. They're they're devoured. There's no battle. There's no Custer's last stand. The operation fails utterly, completely, finally, and forever. And the devil who was with them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone where the beast and the false prophet are, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. And I saw a great white throne. So now we have, remember, John is seeing a series of visions. They're like little modules. A module is a self-contained packet. You can kind of stick it anywhere. It's like a brick. You can put it anywhere on the wall. So he's seeing all these series of visions. He's telling us the order in which he saw the visions. But he's not telling us the order in which they will necessarily happen. And so here we do have a little bit of a challenge, because how is he seeing this? Or when, I guess, is he seeing this? And we will deal with this more fully in a couple weeks, but just a preview to meditate on. If we go back there to Daniel 7 again. It says, I watched till thrones were put in place. What do we see in Revelation 20, verse 4? Thrones were put in place, and judgment was committed to them who sat on them. So you've got the thrones, and then you've got the Ancient of Days. He's seated on his throne, right? So then we see in Revelation 20, verse 11, and I saw a great white throne, and him who sat on it, from whose face earth and heaven fled away. So in Daniel, what is the sequence? What do you guys see there in Daniel? What's the sequence of events?
Daniel 9.
Daniel 7, verse 9.
Is that the night vision?
Pardon?
The night vision?
Yeah. Verse 9, I watched till thrones were put in place.
There was a night dreadful and terrible.
7, verse 9.
Oh, the Ancient of Days were seated.
Okay.
And the garment was white.
Okay. Yep. Got this burning flame. Verse 10. Fiery stream. Thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. Sure sounds like the who.
Well, we're next to him, and those people are in front of sinners.
Okay. I mean, the 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated and the books were opened. This sounds like the what throne judgment? Yeah, this sounds like the great white throne judgment, doesn't it? But then look what happened. I watched then because of the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking. I watched till the beast was slain and its body destroyed and given to the burning flame. Where do we see this happening in Revelation? In chapter 19, right? That's the second coming. So there's something very curious about this. And so you have the second coming, then you've got the rest of the beasts are taken away, their lives or their dominion taken away, their lives prolonged for a season at a time. So this is when, at the beginning of chapter 20, Revelation, when the great angel comes and takes hold of the dragon, puts a chain on him, and throws him into the pit. You're following me? Okay. Because in Isaiah 24:22, it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord will punish on high the host of exalted ones, a.k.a. principalities and powers, and on the earth, the kings of the earth. You see the distinction between there? Isaiah 24:22, 21 and 22. It shall come to pass in that day that the Lord will punish on high the host of exalted ones. Right? For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. In the heavenly places. That's what it's talking about in Isaiah 24:21. So they will be gathered together as prisoners are gathered in the pit, and will be shut up in the prison. After many days they will be punished. So this is, Revelation 20 is only focusing on Satan. This is focusing on all of the principalities and powers and rulers of spiritual darkness. And then in Daniel 7, what we see there is the beast, the beast and the false prophet are thrown into the burning flame, and the beasts, their dominion, that is the fallen angels, their dominion is taken away. And we're not told where they're put, we're just told that for a time and a season they'll be dealt with. And then who's coming?
Jesus.
Right. I was watching the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Then to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom the one which shall not be destroyed. So this sounds like what? What's the order here? If we didn't have the book of Revelation, we only had the book of Daniel, how would you do the order of events? Sounds like we got a judgment. Then we have the second coming of the beast destroyed. And then we have Jesus taking up the kingdom. So somehow we have to reconcile these verses together and say, okay, how do we understand these, right? We don't take Revelation in isolation. We don't take Daniel in isolation. We take them both together, and any other verses we can find, to make the complete picture. So going back then to Revelation chapter 20, so you've got this great white throne judgment, the great and the small standing before God. Books were opened, just as we heard in Daniel. They're all judged. The sea gave up the dead that were in it. Death and Hades delivered up the dead that were in them. And they were judged, each one according to his works. And death and Hades were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. That actually makes me think that death and Hades are actually entities. Because to cast them into the lake of fire makes me think, I can't prove this absolutely, but there's a few passages in the scriptures that talk about death and Hades. I do, but they're not in English. So the grave is naked before him, and there is no covering for Abaddon. So Abaddon and Mavet said, in our ears we have heard a saying, Sheol is naked before him, and destruction has no covering. Where else did we hear that? Hell and destruction are before the Lord, so how much more the hearts of the sons of men. It basically, the way that the language is just we hear, have the gates of death been revealed to you? And then, of course, we have that wonderful passage there in where God is mocking. He's mocking death. Of course, we see that in 1 Corinthians 15, but I'm referring really to the Old Testament. It's the book of Hosea. Hosea 13:14. There we go. I will ransom them from the power of the grave. I will redeem them from death. O death, I will be your plagues. O grave, I will be your destruction. Pity is hidden from my eyes. So, okay, maybe it's just a sort of a poetic personification, but it really sounds to me like God is actually just kind of he's mocking these entities. Where is your power? I'm going to do you in. And the fact that death and Hades are cast into that lake of fire, to me, it sounds more like they sound like entities to me. It's hard to cast a non-living thing into this lake of fire. I don't see the point, frankly. So then we come to Revelation 21. Ta-da! Now I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. And of course we read in Revelation 20:11, then I saw a great white throne, and him who sat on it, from whose face earth and the heaven fled away, and there was no place found for them. We discussed this before, but just as a reminder, the word fled is an aorist tense, which means that it's somewhat timeless, if you will. It could be translated just as well as a past perfect, from whose face the earth and the heaven had fled away. So again, it's not saying that when he saw this, then it happened. But he's using this as a description of the one who's sitting on the throne. I was on the bus the other day, and I saw one sitting on the seat who won the Olympics. Okay, so it's a description. It's a verbal description of the person who's sitting there. So it doesn't throw off our time at all. Now I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth passed away, and there was no more sea. Then I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people. God himself will be with them and be their God. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away. So where are we? We're seeing the New Jerusalem. So we've got a new environment, that's for sure. And now you've got the New Jerusalem. And this tabernacle of God, here it comes. He's going to dwell with them. It's going to be great. Then he who sat on the throne said, Behold, I make all things new. And he said to me, Write, for these words are true and faithful. And he said to me, It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. I will give of the fountain of the water of life freely to him who thirsts. He who overcomes shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son. But the cowardly, unbelieving, abominable, murderers, sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls filled with the seven last plagues came to me and talked with me, saying, Come, I will show you the bride, the Lamb's wife. And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great, or a pond really, a great and high mountain, and showed me the great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God, having the glory of God. Her light was like a most precious stone, like a jasper stone, clear as crystal. Also she had a great and high wall with 12 gates and 12 angels at the gates, and names written on them, which are the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. 3 gates on the east, 3 gates on the north, 3 gates on the south, and 3 gates on the west. Now the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and on them were the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. And he who talked with me had a gold reed to measure the city, its gates, and its walls. The city is laid out as a square. Its length is as great as its breadth. And he measured the city with the reed, 12,000 furlongs. Its length, breadth, and height are equal. Then he measured its wall, 140 cubits, according to the measure of a man, that is, of an angel. The construction of its wall was of jasper, and the city was pure gold, like clear glass. The foundations of the wall of the city were adorned with all kinds of precious stones. The first foundation was jasper, the second sapphire, the third chalcedony, the fourth emerald, the fifth sardonyx, the sixth sardius, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth topaz, the 10th chrysoprase, the 11th jacinth, and the 12th amethyst. The 12 gates were 12 pearls. Each individual gate was of 1 pearl, and the street of the city was pure gold like transparent glass. But I saw no temple in it, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. The city, notice here, the city had no need for the sun or of the moon to shine in it, for the glory of God illuminated it. The Lamb is its light, and the nations of those who are saved shall walk in its light, and the kings of the earth shall bring their glory and honor into it. So, the kings of the earth, they're going to bring their glory and honor into it. That certainly sounds like we've got kingdoms and all these things out there. When Jesus talks about, if you're faithful, you'll be put over, 1 city or 2 cities or many cities. And we think, well, how can that be in heaven that you'll have these different cities? Well, because it's not out there far and away, nor is it necessarily in the so-called eternal state where there's no more differentiation, where there's no more, there'll be differentiation, but there's no more, basically it happens in the Millennium, where you still have nation states. Its gates shall not be shut at all by day, there shall be no more night there, and they shall bring the glory and honor of the nations into it. But there shall by no means enter anything that defiles or causes abomination or a lie, but only those who are written in the Lamb's Book of Life. So we're not talking about the classical understanding of heaven, but we're talking about this city, which of course is heaven, but it's now down here on the earth. So there's still the unregenerate, or the mortals that remain on earth, and you've got God there in its center. You can only go in if you've kept God's commandments. There will be a highway for people that want to come. Now, obviously, God is the big attraction, but as part of that, there will be this river of life and the trees of life that will be there for people to come and to partake of, which we'll talk about next week. But the city is known as the Lord is there. Well, any questions? Please, ask some questions. Yes?
On the like a pyramid?
Well, see, that's the thing, is it doesn't have to be. All that it has to do is, it just has to be equal. So we first have to, we draw a, so we've got here our cube, or our square, if you will, right? This is the on-side looking at it. So certainly a cube would work.
But there wouldn't be a cornerstone.
Right.
I mean,
Unless you just have one right here, right?
I think
Yeah.
I think the cornerstone's on top.
I think so too.
Yeah, I think cornerstone's on top.
Now certainly,
I think there's a chair on it.
you know, well, I hope I didn't influence you too much. Hopefully it's in the Bible, right? So if each one of these is equal, then the height has to be equal as well. But see, this is where a pyramid works very well. So this, it just simply has to be equal to this. The hypotenusae, I suppose, it doesn't matter how long they are. Only the height has to be equal to this. And then, of course, it's 4 square. So all the way around the base, you're going to have a square for sure. And each one of these is equal to the other. Now, Don's not here to defend his thesis. Yes, good. Just kidding. I'm under the persuasion that when it says 1,500 miles or 12,000 stadia, that it's not that each of these has to be that measure, but it's a sum total of the measures. And just here's something to think about. And I really don't know the answer. Okay, I haven't come to an absolute dogmatic position yet. So I'm very open on this. But as I see it today, the sum total, I believe, makes a lot more sense. One thing that I would say is probably in favor of my thesis is that the rabbis talked about how the new or the heavenly Jerusalem would be from Jerusalem, like measure from today's Jerusalem to Damascus. That's about 140 miles. So if you took the sum total, there are 8 edges on a pyramid, and then you divided those 8, assuming this is somewhat off mathematically, but for argument's sake, that would put each edge about 192 miles on each side. So that's pretty close. It's in the ballpark of what the rabbis were saying. I think it's a much more organic and earth-size kind of shape. It's still massive. You know, if I'm right, it's still a very massive city. It's 100 and almost 200 miles way up into space. See, the thing about the cube that I don't think works very well is, you know, here's planet Earth, and if the cube is 1,500 miles on each side, and it's actually even bigger than that, it's about the size of the moon stuck to the Earth.
Yeah.
Some people would have it to just be forever orbiting planet Earth, but I don't see that language in there. It doesn't say it's going to orbit planet Earth. Goodness, what's his name? I'm forgetting. Through the Bible with, what's his name? Dr. Vernon McGee. Yeah, he suggests that you have a cube and then a cube inside a circle. You know, and he gives his reasons for that, but I don't see that in Scripture either. All we're told about the city is that he says that he's going to measure the city. See, this is we just have to look at the language here. So he's given a golden reed to do what? To measure the city, its gates, and its wall. So we're given the measure of the wall. That's 144 cubits, which is roughly 200 feet. So you know, if it's the traditional cube idea, then you have a cube flanked by a 200-foot wall. You've got a 150 or 1,500 mile city, and it's got this measly little 200-foot wall on the side. It doesn't quite seem right. It just seems really out of proportion. And then the other thing is, so we know about the wall, but what about those gates? See, that's the other thing is, he says, okay, and then so he measured it. The city is laid out as a square, and he measured the city, but we're never told about its gates. So there's something that appears to be missing there. And there's a big clue in Ezekiel 48. And he says, verse 30, these are the exits of the city. So these are the gates. On the north side, measuring 4,500 measures, not cubits, incidentally. The word cubits is not in the text. It's the measure. Midot, measures. And a measure is about 10 feet. So that would be 45,000 feet is the sum total of 3 gates.
So what's the sum?
Yes. These are the exits. On the north side, you've got 1 gate for 3 gates northward. 1 for Reuben, 1 for Judah, 1 for Levi. And on each side. So, and then they give us a sum total down here at the bottom, which is 18,000. But not of the wall going around it, but it's the total of the exits. It's the total of the exits. So that means that each gate or each exit is about 15,000 feet, which is just under 5 miles. Is that right? My math good? I hope so. Correct me if I'm wrong. So that would mean, so yeah, 4,500 times 10 is 45,000, right? As a sum total divided by 3 is 15 each, 15,000. And a mile is roughly 5,000 feet, right? So you've got just under 5 miles is the size of 1 gate. So these gates aren't these little tiny things. These are big, massive gates. They're 5 miles across. So, I think that a smaller dimensional city certainly makes those gates more impressive. They seem to be more in line with everything. But see, that's what's left out in Revelation 21, is he measured, we know about the walls, and then he says he measured the city. And we don't hear anything more about those gates. So it seems like the gates are either included in this number, or I guess they're not. But, so I would say at the very least you have to divide the city by 5, because if you divide the 1,500 by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so that make each length about 300 feet. I think that works a lot better. Some would suggest that you have to divide it by 4. Albert Barnes suggests that. I think that's also plausible. I just don't think 1,500 in each direction, because then you have a very disproportionate city to the size of the earth. Don't worry, there'll be lots of space in it. Think about this. Mount Everest is 6 miles high. At the very least, the city is going to be 200 miles high. And if I'm totally wrong, it'll be 1,500 miles high. All right? So it's going to be massive. But I still think 200 miles high is pretty big. So God is up there, literally in the heavens, right? Satan comes and tries to take the city. Fire comes and just descends from God from heaven, devours him, and that's the end of them. They're done.
What would be the pitch, the grade of the sides of that? Would it be steep?
Well, let's see. That would be a right-angled triangle. Help me out here, somebody. Is that a 45 degree? Is it 45 degrees? Yeah. So it'd be 45 degrees.
Pretty steep.
It's steep, but it's a whole lot less steep than a cube. And it could be that it's like a stepped pyramid kind of thing.
Yeah.
So you might have, some living space on each one of these, some platforms. I don't know.
I like those.
I think, sky's the limit probably. But it may not just be it may not be all an inward kind of city, but very much an outward kind of city as well. So.
It's hierarchy, like a hierarchical.
Yeah.
Like those with the greatest rewards are at the top, and
Well, I don't know.
No.
Yeah, I won't
they
speculate
get the
on that.
penthouse suite.
I won't speculate on
I'm
that.
gonna touch that.
But you could have something like this, kind of like stair steps, and each one of these, is who knows? It's 5 miles each one of these this way or something, and then there's living space. I mean, who knows, right? We just don't know. We just don't know.
Like the hanging towers at Babylon.
Yeah, but it's going to be gorgeous. It's going to be gorgeous. So, well, let's stop there for today. If there are no more questions, I'll hang out and talk.